Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to dive right into a fascinating, highly regulated, and perfectly balanced microscopic world that exists right inside the human body. We're talking about the vaginal ecosystem. By the end of this, you're going to understand exactly how this environment protects itself, what happens when it, falls out of balance, and the exact clinical science we use to get things back on track.
Okay, let's start with this massive number, 1 billion. That is up to 10 to the 9th power. To put that into perspective, that's the incredible density of bacteria colony-forming units per single milliliter in a normal, dynamic vaginal ecosystem. It's literally a bustling, microscopic metropolis. And just like any well-functioning city, it needs specific conditions and some pretty strict peacekeepers so things don't descend into total chaos.
To understand how this all works, here's our roadmap for today. We'll look at the dynamic vaginal ecosystem, what happens when balance is lost, understanding yeast infections, unpacking bacterial vaginosis, and finally, restoring the balance. Starting with Section 1, the dynamic vaginal ecosystem, the body's rainforest.
So those peacekeepers I mentioned, they're protective bacteria called Lactobacilli. In a healthy state, they absolutely dominate, outnumbering any potentially harmful microbes by a massive ratio of about 200 to 1. Think of them as the ultimate biological guardians, working 24/7 to maintain a defensive barrier where outside pathogens simply cannot survive.
What's truly fascinating here is how specific strains of these lactobacilli, like Crispatus and Gasseri, work around the clock to keep their environment perfectly acidic. They strictly maintain the pH right between 3.8 and 4.5. And how do they pull this off? Well, they actually produce hydrogen peroxide. Yep, the exact same stuff you probably have sitting in your medicine cabinet right now. This natural hydrogen peroxide is highly toxic to invading bad bacteria, and it even shows in vitro toxicity against viruses like HIV.
Moving on to Section 2, when balance is lost, triggers and disruptors.
But what happens when things go wrong? Well, one of the most common disruptors is something many of us take all the time: broad-spectrum antibiotics. Let's say you take a pill for a sinus infection. That medication doesn't just target the bad germs in your nose. It circulates through your entire body, and unfortunately, it kills off our protective lactobacilli down in the vaginal ecosystem too. With the peacekeepers gone, opportunistic organisms can suddenly multiply completely out of control.
Another major disruptor? Unmanaged blood sugar. People with poorly managed diabetes are basically providing an absolute feast for opportunistic fungi. Just like the yeast you use in baking thrives on sugar, the natural yeast in the body feeds on elevated blood glucose. This dramatically raises the risk of a massive fungal overgrowth. Plus, a weakened immune system plays a really huge role here. Lowered immunity, whether that's from medications like corticosteroids, conditions like HIV, or even naturally raised estrogen levels during pregnancy or from birth control pills, can severely weaken the body's natural defenses. It literally leaves the door wide open for an imbalance.
Let's look closely at Section 3, understanding yeast infections, the fungal bloom. So, Candida albicans. This is a fungus that actually lives naturally in the vagina in small, totally harmless amounts. But when those lactobacilli are suppressed, this fungus blooms and causes some intense irritation. It's incredibly common too. We're talking about an experience that affects roughly 75% of people assigned female at birth at least once in their lifetime, with a lot of people dealing with it multiple times.
Now, when you're trying to identify a yeast infection, you're looking for some highly specific, really uncomfortable symptoms. You'll typically feel intense itching, swelling, and a burning sensation, especially during urination. But the biggest clinical giveaway? That would be a thick white vaginal discharge that often looks a lot like cottage cheese, paired with little to no odor. That lack of odor is absolutely crucial for distinguishing it from our next condition.
Which brings us to Section 4, unpacking bacterial vaginosis, the anaerobic rebellion.
To really understand bacterial vaginosis, or BV, we need to clarify what it actually is. It's not an outside infection you catch. Instead, it's a polymicrobial clinical syndrome. Basically, our natural hydrogen peroxide-producing lactobacilli get pushed out and replaced by a massive overgrowth of anaerobic bacteria. These are bacteria that thrive without oxygen. It's essentially a rebellion from right within the microbiome itself.
And there is a stark, clinical contrast between these two conditions. While a yeast infection features that thick, odorless discharge, BV presents with a homogeneous, clear, or gray-white discharge. BV is also often accompanied by a distinct, fishy odor that usually gets stronger after sex. But surprisingly, it causes very little to no itching.
In fact, over half of BV cases can be completely asymptomatic.
But, even if it's asymptomatic, we really have to take BV seriously. If left untreated, this anaerobic overgrowth carries some significant clinical risks. It can increase your susceptibility to HIV, cause postoperative infections, lead to pelvic inflammatory disease, and incredibly importantly, it can trigger premature delivery for expectant mothers. So yeah, it is far from just a minor nuisance.
Finally, Section 5, Restoring the Balance, Clinical Treatments.
Because we're dealing with two entirely different situations here, a rapidly multiplying fungus on one side and a swarm of rogue anaerobic bacteria on the other, the treatments obviously have to be completely different. You can't treat a bacterial rebellion with an antifungal, and you definitely can't treat a fungal bloom with an antibacterial. Precision is absolute key here.
So to defeat bacterial vaginosis specifically, clinical guidelines recommend highly targeted antibiotic regimens. We're talking about things like oral metronidazole, taking 500 milligrams twice daily for 7 days. Alternatively, topical gels or clindamycin creams applied directly to the site work really well too. These medications basically act like a highly trained strike team, clearing out those harmful anaerobes so that peacekeeping lactobacilli can swoop back in and reclaim their territory.
But protecting your ecosystem from future disruptions mostly comes down to some really simple, everyday preventative steps. Wearing breathable cotton crotch underwear stops moisture from trapping fungi. Avoiding douching entirely is absolutely critical because douching literally flushes away your good lactobacilli. Eliminating scented tampons and bubble baths keeps harsh chemicals far away from this sensitive pH environment. And finally, only take antibiotics when absolutely prescribed by a doctor for a verified bacterial infection. That saves your microbiome from getting unnecessarily carpet bombed. Understanding this hidden world really changes how we look at our own health, doesn't it? It's not just about treating symptoms. It's about actively managing an entire microscopic ecosystem. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. Now that you know exactly how your bodily rainforest works, what everyday changes will you make to protect it? And how are you going to advocate for its delicate balance during your very next doctor's visit?